We need not think alike to love alike has been a popular maxim among Unitarian Universalists to explain how it is that our congregations can welcome individuals with such widely varying beliefs. It is generally attributed to the 16th century Unitarian reformer Francis David, but no scholar I know has ever found it in David's extant writings, and it appears to have been unknown to Unitarians in the cradle of Unitarianism until recent years. I don't recall seeing it mentioned much until the 1980s, and it has been speculated that its origin and attribution date no earlier than sometime in the 1960s. It's sort of like that famous quotation attributed to Chief Seattle, which isn't Chief Seattle at all, but a university student from the 1960s. However, it became commonplace after a variation of it appeared in the Gray hymn book, Singing the Living Tradition, in 1993. And it is now quoted by Unitarians, Universalists, with the confidence that others have in quoting from the Bible. We have taken a recent text, made it ancient, and fallen in love with it. Rather than our own Francis David, who is depicted addressing the Diet of Torta in a magnificent print that hangs in our church library, the expression is properly attributed to John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, who asked it as a rhetorical question in his 1750 sermon on the Catholic spirit. Though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike, he asked. May we not be of one heart, though we are not of one opinion. Without all doubt, we may. Herein all the children of God may unite, notwithstanding these smaller differences. Wherever the expression comes from, it's a tall order. Love and unity are both wonderful ideals, but both are hard to achieve in practice, if it's even possible. It is possible to love someone else, I suppose, and still be unable to find yourself in close proximity to them. And it's possible to feel a sense of solidarity with some cause or another without being able to work alongside others to achieve it. Love and unity are difficult, even in favorable circumstances, which is why congregations where love is the spirit that unites them still cannot escape conflict, and why holiday dinners are so often best spent with chosen families rather than the ones that can claim us by birth. Still, some communities and some families seem better able to welcome diversity and find unity than others. It probably has more to do with an attitude towards life than it does with any particularly strongly held belief. The 17th century English dissenter Richard Baxter claimed as his motto, "In necessary things, unity. In doubtful things, liberty. In all things, charity." This was rephrased by 19th century Unitarians to read unity in the essential, liberty in the dubious, and charity in all. And they likewise attributed this maxim to various individuals within our own religious tribe. The Icelandic Unitarians here in Manitoba put the words into the mouth of the theologian Magnus Eriksson, who is said to have uttered them at a synod conference in Copenhagen in the 1870s. but I have seen this expression attributed to others, most notably that famous author from the past known simply as Anonymous. In some ways, this approach to finding unity and diversity is more workable in practice. That is, once you've determined what's necessary and what's doubtful, which is to say, optional. I could help you here if I weren't a relatively modest individual by simply explaining to you what's necessary and cautioning you about what's doubtful and assuming that you would agree with me because you would be feeling, well, charitable. But I know better. And I know from a lifetime spent working with liberal religious congregations that achieving unity amidst diversity is an ongoing. That's where things get difficult, since genuine diversity allows for differing opinions about the essentials as well as the options. Moreover, we always find ourselves in the realm of competing values, where what is essential to one is dubious to another. And so it is that if we sat down and filled in a questionnaire, or perhaps responded during the annual church canvass to, let's say, 3 questions that were asked of us by our canvassers, we could come up with a surprisingly large number of opinions about what the essentials are and what the options or possibilities are, and never quite make it to any place that might be called unity. Achieving unity in a community is very difficult. And if there's a genius to Unitarian Universalism, it's that we probably have less expectation of being able to do so. You see, if you show up, say, at one of those large evangelical churches on the south side of the city or near the north perimeter, where there are many more people gathered than there may be gathered here today, their rooms will be filled, their sanctuaries full of people who utter a select number of words and somehow imagine that they all mean the same thing. It takes psychologists and sociologists to burrow beneath their common words, their understanding of God, their beliefs about Jesus, their assumptions about the various church doctrines. It takes further study to discern what people really mean. It strikes me as part of the modesty, the humility of Unitarian Universalism that we are clear up front that the way we use particular words and think of particular values may vary from person to person. Since the middle of the 20th century, we Unitarian Universalists have emphasized and celebrated our diversity while being less clear about what unifies our congregations and the larger tradition of which they are a part. This has led our critics to portray us as ambiguous at best, superficial at worst, and I suppose there is a whole other list of adjectives that outsiders may inflict upon Unitarian Universalists to describe how it is that we can't seem to pinpoint what it is that we stand for, what it is that we believe, what it is that we hold in common with the same certainty, the same clarity as other religious people. In our religious tradition, unity and diversity exist in tension with one another. The same is true in any religious tradition, of course, once you scratch beneath the surface, but it's an existential question for Unitarian Universalists since we have put so much emphasis on diversity and tolerance over the course of our history. Our name derives from two doctrinal positions rooted in our Christian past, Unitarianism and Universalism. But it might easily be argued today that we are neither Unitarian nor Universalist, and certainly not in the original sense. Although after 2 centuries, the meanings of those words have evolved among us in a way that means they are still meaningful to us. The kernel of our broad, inclusive approach to religious community, which welcomes diversity and seeks to fashion some sort of unity from among our varied strands, can be traced back to how Unitarians and Universalists both disturbed the theological consensus of early 19th century New England. Beyond the early Unitarians' affirmation of the simple unity of God, as opposed to the doctrine of the Trinity, which was more or less a superficial consideration during the Unitarian controversy 2 centuries ago, the name came to us more as an accusation than a label we claimed for ourselves. And their refutation of Calvinist doctrine, of the Calvinist doctrine of original sin and human depravity, a more significant difference between Orthodox Congregationalists and Unitarian Congregationalists, as we were once known, an essential ingredient in understanding the split in New England Congregationalism, which led to a distinctive Unitarian denomination, was the liberals' answer to the question posed by the biblical prophet Amos. Can two walk together except they be agreed? The Orthodox answer, which emphasized the primacy of belief and behavior, which is to say doctrine and discipline, was a firm no. It is not possible to walk together, that is, to establish a religious community and follow an evolving, diverging, but common path together without being agreed in belief and the behaviors that follow from it. This is why we used to talk about mixed marriages and the difficulty of making them work. There was an assumption that even a single couple marrying one another, deeply in love with one another, might not be able to overcome the differences related to their religious belief, because it was believed that such beliefs or such differences were insurmountable. By contrast, the liberals answered Amos's question with an unequivocal yes. It is possible to walk together in spiritual fellowship, irrespective of differences of belief and with the breadth of allowable behavior. Thus, very early in our history as a separate religious body, Conrad Wright reports, we insisted that creedal statements are not the proper basis of religious fellowship. More than that theological diversity is not only to be tolerated, but embraced as a good thing. We assert the right and duty of each one of us to adhere to their own understanding of religious truth, and we accept the obligation to respect one another, even if we do not always agree. We believe deeply in the capacity of people of goodwill to walk together in religious fellowship despite such doctrinal differences. However, it's important to remember that during the first half of the 19th century, Unitarian diversity occurred entirely within a Christian context. Save for those who sought to exclude our ancestors from the Church Universal, no Unitarians or Universalists ever doubted that they were part of the larger Christian tradition. So they still found their unity in a common but evolving understanding of God, Jesus, the Bible, and the church. But the liberals' answer to Amos did lead to an ever-widening circle. And so the evolution of this congregationally based liberal religious tradition began, and it departed from its roots. It might be argued that modern-day Unitarian Universalist is more about the branches than the roots of the plant, more about the wings that we sing of in one of our hymns. First, we had the Transcendentalists in New England, led by Emerson and Henry Thoreau and others, who loosened the fetters of Unitarianism to the Christian tradition, who began the embrace of native spirituality here and of the cultivation of an understanding of the world's religious traditions for what they might have to offer us. Then came free religion, largely the product of radical Unitarian ministers who wanted to loosen the bonds even further and have religious communities that weren't explicitly Christian at all, although most tended to be theist in some way or another. Then there's the Western Unitarian Conference, a radical phenomenon as Unitarianism moved west from New England. Many of its members advocated for the ethical basis of religion, that behavior was a more consideration and a more important consideration, and that ethical values were important to us. That, of course, led to humanism, to a wider appreciation still of world religions, and over again, the Unitarian and Universalist tent grew to include larger and larger numbers of ideas, if not necessarily larger and larger numbers of people. It is a curious phenomenon that as our ideas have broadened, as what we accept as religiously meaningful has grown wider, that our numbers as a proportion of the population have declined. Perhaps it's because so often we just look like the larger liberal culture. We look like philosophies defined by the Enlightenment tradition, and it's hard to distinguish us from these larger phenomena. There were attempts made to define the consensus that united us. There was James Freeman Clarke, who postulated the 5 points of Unitarianism in direct response to the 5 points of Calvinism. And in fact, I am old enough to remember this being in this church's Sunday school program, the 5 points of Unitarianism, that we believed in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, and the progress of humankind upward and onward forever. Try that on. Yeah. The next time someone asks you, oh, what's Unitarian Universalism about? Well, launch into that. Now, it has sometimes been jokingly summarized as the fatherhood of God, the leadership of Jesus, and the neighborhood of Boston, which is an equally valid response, I suppose. Following that, Jenkin Lloyd-Jones in the Western Unitarian Conference argued that truth, beauty, and goodness were the basis of Unitarianism. The Western Unitarian Conference itself formally said freedom, fellowship, and character in religion. And in the last century, Earl Morris Wilbur spoke of freedom, reason, tolerance. And this congregation actually had bus stop benches emblazoned with those 3 values on them: freedom, reason, tolerance. The farther away we have moved from the origins of our tradition, the harder it has become to define just what it is that unifies us. If any community is to survive, cautions Conrad Wright, and to accomplish anything, its members must have some common goals, some common purposes, a value system generally accepted, a consensus widely shared. He has said this after reflecting on the various controversies within Unitarianism and Unitarian Universalism over the years. What these controversies were doing was defining the boundaries of consensus, he asserted. Boundaries may be fuzzy, but they're there. No group can include everybody. No religious group can satisfy the needs of all. By the recognition of boundaries, we identify that part of the ecclesiastical landscape that we are prepared to occupy, are prepared to serve. Boundaries change. They are not fixed for all time. Notwithstanding his fondness for the liberals' answer to Amos, and notwithstanding his own great liberality, this led Conrad Wright to conclude that ultimately the Orthodox had the right answer to Amos's question. Can two walk together except they be agreed? No, they cannot, unless they are agreed on at least a few things of overriding importance. It is when they can agree on some basic attitudes and values that they are freed to tolerate much diversity in other matters. It seems to me that a good challenge for this congregation for the coming year would be to seek to define its essentials, to better be able to articulate what is central to being a member of this community, so that we can let the rest go and allow the flowering of a rich diversity that allows us to express those central, essential tenets in as many ways as possible. I had prepared a different ending than I'm going to conclude with this morning. And that's because on my way to church, it occurred to me that the real basis of our unity as congregations and as a larger movement is probably not found in the Unitarian Universalist Association's statement of principles. It is not necessarily found in our statement of sources. It is not found in any creed or document that we may seek to hold up as expressing who we are. If you want to discover the present-day consensus that unifies us, you will find it in our hymn books. Back in the 1960s, we produced a hymn book called Hymns for the Celebration of Life. It was, in a sense, the first post-Christian hymn book of our tradition that sought to weave together the varied strands that had developed to that point and give them each voice in a common hymn book, a collection of songs and of readings that speak of the liberal tradition. When Singing the Living Tradition came out in 1993, it once again reflected the consensus of Unitarian Universalism as it then existed. And the reason that we so often use singing the journey in our worship services is because even that consensus in 3 short decades has continued to evolve. What we are about, this strange religious community without a scripture or a singular deity or a particular set of doctrines, what we are about is revealed more than ever in our hymn books, in the hymns we sing, in the songs we wish were here but are not. It occurs to me that when I watch this congregation sing particular hymns with vigor, with zeal, the congregation is actually declaring what's at the heart of this community more than the compiled results of the annual church canvass, more than an opinion survey may reveal. We sing about what matters to us. And so it is that I believe our essential unity is not revealed to us by surveys. It's not revealed to us by theologians. It's not revealed to us by sociologists and other scholars of religious community. As it has been for many people and in many places in the past, the essence of who we are is revealed to us by poets and songwriters. The center of our faith is not a creed, but an anthem. Please join in hymn number 188 in the Gray Hymn Book, which we will sing as a round, led by Kelvin, Debbie, and Joseph.